365 Finance and Operations. Today we'll be talking about the upcoming features and the roadmap for the product, as well as what's changed with the release to GA versus what was previously covered in prior tech talks around the preview version of the invoice capture functionality. My name is Kevin Giardini. I'm a member of the D365 Finance ACE team here at Microsoft, and presenting alongside me is Rain Zhu, and I will hand it over to Rain.
Thanks, Kevin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yeah. For the ones who don't know me, my name is Rain Zhu. I'm the program manager from Dynamics 365 Finance team. I'm owning the whole accounts payable module. Today, I will give you the presentation for the introduction of the invoice capture of the GA version. I know a lot of people or customer has already started the journey of the invoice capture. So coming to the agenda today, first I will give you some introduction about the AP invoice process and then we will give some brief introduction about the invoice capture and the whole vendor invoice automation solution provided by the Microsoft Dynamics 365. And for the next, I will deep dive into two big sections. First is guides you how you could install our solution and what kind of change we have been made compared with the preview. I also will introduce some configuration setup might be useful for your advanced features. And the next, I will give you the guidance how you could process the invoice processing in the invoice capture. And then the next, I will give you what we have been achieved and what is coming for the invoice capture. Later, I will give you some resource link and also the most frequent asked question about the pricing for our solution. And I will also reserve some time to directly answer some questions. So let's jump to the introduction. So for traditional AP invoice processing, so we could go through different steps. So first, you need to capture the invoices from the vendor side by different external channels, for example, the post, email, file server. And you need to capture the invoice in a central place. And once this invoice gets captured, you need to key in the invoice into the ERP system. Then you need to do the validation by comparing the invoice against the purchase order and the product receipt. So this is well-known three-way matching to validate the correctness of the invoice. And if there is some discrepancy, you might need to do some approve process to approve whether this invoice get posted or not. Once it gets approved, then you can do the posting. So this is a typical invoicing processing to be done. And as you know, we actually, once these steps are all done manually, it will cost a lot of time for the AP clerk. So companies are seeking for the whole solution to automate the whole process to save the time for the AP clerk. Microsoft provides an end-to-end solution for the AP invoice process. So in the past, we have introduced the invoice automation already in the F&O side, starting from right after the invoice getting imported, it will start to apply the prepayment, do the receipt matching, and do the validation workflow, and do the auto posting. These jobs are triggered by the automation processing batch job behind. And once the invoice is getting posted, it will, if the auto payment proposal job is also triggered, then the payment journal will be automatically created. So with these automation features, it has already saved a lot of time for the AP clerk to process the invoice. And the feature has been used by quite some customers in the past. And meanwhile, we are continuously to improve the function, performance, different perspectives. But we're still looking at the last piece that at the very beginning, we needed to capture these invoices and then make it complete before imported in the F&O. That's the reason we introduced the invoice capture solution. For the moment, the invoice capture solution can only handle the paper invoices. And in our roadmap, we would like also include the e-invoice into the invoice capture to make sure all the invoice to be landed in a central place to be processed. And if we look at the detail of the invoice capture, it's split into 4 phases. At the beginning, in the invoice capture, we have a concept called the channel. The channel actually defines the ways how you receive the invoice from vendor side. I will give you some detailed introduction in the later configurations part. Yeah. And once this invoice is sent via this channel, our invoice capture will successfully capture these kind of documents and do the file process. And in the file processing, we actually will call the AI builder model to do the recognition. And we use this pre-built model, and which doesn't require any training efforts from the customer side. And once this recognition is done, it will send to the capture invoice staging phase. In this phase, we will apply derivation validation logic depends on different invoice types. I will introduce what invoice types later in the later section. And then if the invoice complete, it will automatically transfer to the F&O. If it contains some errors, we also provide a nice UI called the side-by-side viewer to help AP clerk to correct the invoice. And in the F&O side, you can decide which invoice framework should be used to proceed the invoice. We have two main frameworks in the F&O. One is vendor invoice and one is invoice journal. We have some settings to let you decide which framework should be used. Next, I will first give you a demo to show you how the whole process works, the procure-to-pay process works. Yeah.
In this session, we will provide an end-to-end demo to show how we use invoice capture to automate the procurement-to-pay process. Inga, the purchasing manager of Contoso, ordered some sound equipment from Fabricom Electronics. Meanwhile, the equipment needs to be installed by specialists. She created 2 purchase orders in the system. Fabricom Electronics confirmed the purchase order and delivered the goods immediately. Sammy, the shipping and receiving manager, confirmed that the goods have been received and logged the receipt entries in the system. Fabricom Electronics also sent the specialists to install the sound equipment. After the product receipt was confirmed, Fabricom Electronics sent the first invoice via email and the second invoice via SharePoint. April, the AP clerk from Contoso, needs to check and process the incoming invoices. Let's see how she works in Invoice Capture and Dynamics 365 Finance. April 1st opens Invoice Capture application in the Power Platform. Then she clicks the Captured Invoices menu under My Work to open the list of invoices. The invoices are shown on the top of list under the default view, which means the invoices need to be amended. April clicks the invoice number, and it jumps to the details. A modern side-by-side viewer is opened, which shows the original document on the left side and the extracted information on the right side. The document header shows the derived value for legal entity, vendor account, and invoice type. If the legal entity or vendor account is not identified, or the values are not correctly determined, April can click the classified invoice in the ribbon to manually select the values. By clicking Start View button, April can correct the invoice. The message pane shows an overview about the number of messages with different severities. By clicking the messages, it will navigate to the corresponding invoice field or invoice line. If it is an extracted field, April can click the eyeball to highlight the place of the invoice field on the original document. April reviews all the fields and correct the errors and warnings, then click Complete Review. By clicking the Transfer button, the invoice will be transferred to the D365 Finance system to generate a pending vendor invoice. Status transferred and notification message will show the invoice has been successfully transferred. Now, April opened the Dynamics 365 Finance system and goes to the pending vendor invoice list form under Accounts Payable module. The list shows the pending vendor invoices are successfully generated from Invoice Capture. By clicking the View Automation History button, April can view the status from the automation history. The state shows that the first invoice has succeeded in automatic prepayment application, automatic receipt match, and automatic workflow submission. The invoice is then routed to April for the approval according to the settings in the workflow. By clicking Workflow button in the drop-down, April approved the invoice. The invoice is then automatically posted. By repeating the same steps, April approved the second invoice as well. When those invoices are successfully posted, the open transaction entries will be created. In Dynamics 365 Finance, the payment proposal job helps to create the payment journal automatically. After the scheduled job is executed, April can go to the vendor payment journal and check the details in the latest entry. The payment journal entry has been created automatically. By clicking Settle Transaction tab, it shows that the open transaction has been marked for settlement. This saves a lot of effort for April to create the payment entry manually. As we can see with Invoice Capture, Microsoft provides a complete end-to-end solution to automate the procurement to pay process.
So after you view our demo, you can see our Microsoft Dynamics 365 can offer the end-to-end vendor invoice automation solution to the customer. So compared with the other OCR solution, what's the advantages to use our invoice capture solution? First is that we are first-party solution, which integrates with Dynamics 365 and offering out-of-box solution with the most functions ready. Yeah. So for you, you can directly install the solution and do a minimal customization or configurations to have a try for this solution. It won't cost much effort for doing that. Meanwhile, we also introduced a pre-boot model in the out-of-box. This pre-boot model is empowered by Microsoft AI Builder team, and the team will continue to enhance this model. And it currently can support the most common layout of the invoices within different languages. Yeah. As I mentioned, we're also offering a nice UI for the AP clerk to efficiently review and correct the invoice. In the invoice capture processing, we're offering some continuous learning features. This learning feature can remember the last correction you have been made for determining the entity values. And once the second invoice comes, this entity value will be automatically derived. So it will increase the overall touchless rate of the invoice processing in the invoice capture side. And the last is, as I mentioned earlier, that we are offering the two-way of the invoice creation in the F&O side. So these are the advantages of the invoice capture which we're offering. In the next, I will give you deep dive some deployment and configuration for using the invoice capture. Here, I outline the steps how you need to do to deploy our invoice capture solution. I will go into details one by one. So at first, what you need to do is you need to ensure your F&O version meets the following requirements. Yeah. The reason behind it is we introduced some configuration, and we also introduced the batch transfer mechanism, and these features was introduced under this version. So make sure your F&O match this version before you install the invoice capture. And the second is quite important is that invoice capture currently can only support the integrated Power Platform environment. So when you define an environment which is not natively integrated with F&O, you will get some errors during the installation, or when you use the invoice capture, you will have some problems. So how could you distinguish whether your environment is integrated or not? So here I list the point you need to check. Actually, in the admin portal, you can go to the environment detail to check whether you have a field called finance and operation URL under the environment detail form. If it's there, then it's an integrated environment. And meanwhile, once it is an integrated environment, normally the virtual entity solution will be automatically installed. But sometimes we also find out the virtual entity is not installed successfully within the integrated environment. And our solution is highly depends on the readiness of the virtual entity. So please also make sure the virtual entity solution has been successfully installed in your solution, in the environment. Once your F&O version match the criteria, you will find a new features in the F&O which called Invoice Capture for Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation. And you need to enable this feature. After you enable, you will find the Invoice Capture specific settings on the accounts payable parameter setup. And in this settings, you actually need to define the following. First is you need to decide the onboarded legal entity for using the Invoice Capture. And there is a single or vendors flag. If you mark it, it means later when you create or change any vendors within this onboarded legal entity, it will automatically sync this information to the invoice capture side. And the second option is this is control whether you need to transfer the original attachments from the invoice capture to F&O. And we are defaulting this on because once this is transferred, you will also see the attachment by default showing in the pending vendor invoice detail form. And the third is the mapping between the invoice type against the framework which you would like to use to post the invoice. So for PO invoice, we only allows you to post on the pending vendor invoice framework because all the process is automatically done. So we would recommend that you could use this framework to post or proceed the PO relevant invoice. And for the cost invoice, you could either decide to use the vendor invoice with non-stock item or procurement category. And also you can make it simple to directly post the cost invoice into the invoice journal. And some people ask when it is using the invoice journal, whether they can use the own journal name to post the invoice coming from the invoice capture. The answer is yes, because we actually leave some public method to let you to change the default journal names. Via some extension code. And once the environment is set up and the version meets the requirements and the corresponding feature is enabled, so you can start to install the invoice capture. So what you can do is you can directly go to the Microsoft App Store and search this invoice capture for Dynamics 365 Finance. You will find our solution there, and by clicking the free trial, you will start the installation. And it will ask you to select the correct environment. Please make sure you are selected the integrated environment, as I mentioned earlier. It might take some time to complete the installation. After the installation is finished, just make sure the invoice capture solution is showing up in the Power Apps. And then here you need to make sure what you install the invoice capture version is higher than 1.1. Because I still see a lot of people using the preview version. Here, I would like to mention a bit that the preview version will be deprecated soon. So if you are using, please make sure you do the migration to the GA version as soon as possible. After your installation, you also need to define the users who start to use the invoice capture. And there are two main roles. First is the accounts payable admin, who can do the system setup and also can have the access to all the invoices. And for the AP clerk, they can only view the invoice on their assigned legal entity. And I list the ways how you could grant the required legal entity on this role setup. And there is one thing needed to mention is that for operates the invoice capture, the invoice processing in the invoice capture, you also needed to have some special role or privileges to get access to some virtual entities. So in the F&O side, we define a new role called the invoice capture operator. So this role has to be assigned the corresponding user as well. Otherwise, you might have some issue to fetch these virtual entities. And for the environment maker, it's specifically for you to define some flow or doing when you train your own AI build model in the future. So this environment maker normally should assign to the admin to do some additional advanced setup. And now we are coming to the configuration part. So first, very important is the channel. As I mentioned earlier, that the channel defines the ways how you receive the invoice from the vendor side. In our solution, we predefine some templates to you to create the channel easily. When you create the channel, behind the scene, we will generate the Power Automate flow with the correct trigger and the connection type. And as you can see on the right side, this is the flow generated from the template, and you can do some additional setup or advanced settings within this flow. And meanwhile, as you can see, we have this user managed flow toggle. This toggle is you can define unmanaged flow version. Then in this case, you can just record the channel ID, and you can use your API call to directly send the invoice to the invoice capture. And we also have this assign legal entity option. If for some business, they have multiple legal entities, different receipt email for different legal entities. So in this case, they can create a different channel and assign the corresponding legal entity on each channel and then the legal entity will automatically derive during the invoice processing in the invoice capture side. And previously, I mentioned in the F&O, you needed to onboard the legal entity, and you can also mark the sync all vendors. Actually, in the invoice processing, in the invoice capture side, we needed to use this sync the legal entity and the vendor master data to apply some derivation logic to derive the legal entity and the vendor accounts. So what we could do is that you need to double check whether this legal entity or vendor accounts are correctly synced. And there is one thing you need to keep in mind is that the initial vendor's synchronization has to be triggered manually. So once it's done, you will have the whole master data to be synced. And the next is regarding about the manager file filter. So in most cases, customers are receiving different attachments. Sometimes it's most relevant, sometimes it's not. So the file filter is somehow helps you to filter out these non-invoice relevant documents based on the size, file type, or the name. And this file filter can be applied on each channels. And it's a little bit different between the condition on the flow setup. So once you define this file filter, and once the invoice comes and doesn't match the rule of the file filter, these files are still going to be seen in the invoice capture. It requires your double confirmation whether you need these files or not. But if you define some rules in the flow setup, these files will not be imported in the invoice capture. It will be blocked at the very beginning. So you won't see this file again if this condition doesn't meet in the flow setup. So it's a little bit different. Okay. The next is the most important settings in the invoice capture, which we call the manager conversion groups. So in the conversion group, we have three parts of the settings. The first is to define the condition which you need to do the review. By default, it will select as error only, which means only when the invoice contains the error, it will review the invoice. But in some cases, if you want to say the invoices anyhow need to be reviewed, you can set this option as always. And the confidence score setting will decide the severity of the when the invoice getting recognized, it will return the detailed fields with the confidence score. And if the confidence score is low, it might take your attention to check the correctness of the values. And based on what we saw, that the values in the most case is correct, and it gets some noises when you see these confidence score settings, error or warnings. So we will provide the option let you to decide whether you still need this confidence score, warning, or errors. This will come in the future release. And the next is the accepted invoice types. So we define 3 types. One is a PO invoice, and the second is a header-only invoice, and the third is a cost invoice. So PO invoice and the header-only invoice are all the invoice which are associated to the purchase order. The difference is that the PO invoice will require the review on both the header and the lines in the invoice capture side. The header-only invoice will only require to review the header information, and it leaves the system to automatically derive the lines either from the purchase order lines or product receipt lines based on the settings in the app handle side. And the cost invoice is the invoice which are not associated to the purchase order, and you can decide whether it could be mapped to the vendor invoice or invoice journal. The invoice type will decide the derivation and validation logic, and it also will influence the fields control properties. As you can see, we have 3 tabs to define the filter, and in the define fields, and in the fields control, actually you can define whether these fields are going to be shown in the review process. You can also control whether the fields is mandatory to be filled or not in the side-by-side view. And once you define this configuration group, you can assign this configuration group either to the vendor or to the legal entity or system preference. So the sequence, the runtime sequence is like that. So if the configuration group can be found on the vendor, it will use the configuration group on the vendor. And if not, it will check the settings on the legal entity. If not, then it will use the default one on the system preference. With such kind of logic, actually you can define different configuration groups on different vendors to match your business requirements. So next is about talking about the invoice processing, the invoice capture side. So as previously, a customer can define different channels to receive the invoices. And as an auto box, we actually provide the direct upload function, and it appears in the receiver files. Backlinking that and drag and drop the files, you can do the direct upload. To the invoice. And there is a limitation that we can only handle 20 files in one-time upload. Now here is the details how the invoice get processed in the invoice capture side. We actually have 2 processes. One is the touchless, the other is touchless version. So once the invoice is getting captured, it will do some validation and the derivation logic. If the legal entity and the vendor accounts is not getting derived, so you need to do the classify invoice to determine this legal entity value and the vendor accounts value at first. Once it's complete, you can also check the invoice type. Normally it will automatically derive from the settings, but if it's incorrect, you can correct that. And after you confirm this information, you can start to review to correct errors. And we do have different validation logic based on different invoice types. And once you complete all the errors, you can click the computer review. It will do some further check whether there is still some errors or not. Once it has been ensured there is no additional errors, the transfer button is visible for you to click, and by clicking that, the invoice will immediately transfer to the app handle. As you can see, in this process, we are calling the synchronized mode to transfer the invoice. And for the touchless, if there is no error right after the invoice gets captured, and during the transfer, we will leave the invoice to be submitted to an additional station in the app handle side, and these invoice status will stay in the awaiting. The frequency how the invoice is getting processed from the stage in the app handle, it depends on the processing automation job. So this is the new processing automation job which we introduced in the GA version. This will repeatedly to pull the data from the staging and to process the invoice which is sent from the invoice capture. And by default, it will execute the per hour, and you can set the frequency by your own. Depends. If you want to process faster, you can set like on the minute level. As I mentioned earlier, actually, we provide a nice user interface to help AP clerk to review the invoice. So if we check the layout of this user interface, which we call the side-by-side view, on the top right side, we have the document header. It contains the status, legal entity, vendor account, and invoice type. And the legal entity, vendor account, and invoice type is the key of the invoice. So you needed to make sure these values are correct before you start the review. And in the left side, we have the document preview panel, and you can zoom in, zoom out, or do the rotation. And if you saw this eye icon in the invoice header or invoice line panel, this eye icon will help you to navigate to the place of the contents of the field's value. So it will help you to do the review process more precisely. And later, we actually will improve that to support the additional charges and the sales tax in the right side of the side-by-side view. So this, but the layout won't be changed. And as I mentioned, we are currently support a lot of language in the preview model. And for the custom model, it will support more, but the custom model is still not officially supported, because we are waiting for the custom preview model readiness. I will introduce later. And you can check whether your language is on the list or not. Yeah, but I think the phone recognition team will continually to support more languages. So sooner or later, the previewed model will cover most of the common language of the invoice. Talking about the roadmap, as we can see, by the end of July, we actually announced the GA, and the most function you saw was released by the GA version. And we basically will do the monthly or 2 months feature release. And the last month, we actually has already released some features, which I marked as green. And in the next few months, we will release some new features. The two big features which will be covered is first, as I mentioned, we will support the custom previewed model. According to the past feedback from customer side, sometimes they didn't choose our solution because they do have some very complex layout invoices, which cannot be handled well by the previewed model. And the custom previewed model is actually built on the top of the previewed model and do some additional enhancements. Yeah, so the model is owned by the AI Builder team, which will GA in the coming months. I haven't got the finalized date, but it should come in the next 1 or 2 months. And once it's GA, we will do the integration part. So you can actually use the customer previewed model within our solution. By that time, I think you will get more recognition results, from the OCR service. And another major feature we are going to support is the financial dimension for the cost invoices. The financial dimension is a very key information for the cost invoice because it decides the right person for approved expenditures. In some invoices, you actually can capture these financial dimension values directly. So when we support this kind of feature as an end-to-end, it will dramatically increase the touchless rate processing for the cost invoice. And this is just in short the feature which we plan in the coming months. I know there are still some additional features which haven't been mentioned here. For example, the creating nodes and the others. So in case you do have ideas or the urgent requests, please feel free to reach us. This is the resources that I could share with you. And one task ongoing is that I'm preparing some video demo and which will publish externally and to introduce some advanced feature one by one. And for the ones who have joined the Yammer group can view this demo already, but it's not for the externals. So I will do that, and maybe sooner or later you will view the details, in somewhere here. And here I list the email, this DIX AP help service Microsoft.com. In case you do have any questions regarding about the invoice capture, feel free to write an email, or if you have the issues when you use the invoice capture, feel free to send an email to us for the support. And regarding the pricing, invoice capture, actually the pricing has already been announced in the August version of the Dynamics 365 pricing guides. And here I paste the link. Basically, it's for the Dynamics 365 Finance customer, you will get 100 invoice capture transaction free to use. Additionally, it will cost $300 per 1,000 invoices per tenant per month. So you can contact the Microsoft accountant to do the subscription according to your invoice volume. So that's all for my presentation, and we will check the questions in the channels. So there is one question regarding when is the plan to have other formats after paper invoice. I think I have mentioned that we will support the e-invoice in our roadmap, and at the beginning of the presentation, actually we haven't have a concrete research or design on this. So this is might not come shortly, but according to the long-term roadmap, we was targeting that both the paper invoice and the e-invoice should be landed in a central place to processed by the AP clerk. So it will definitely come. If we do have some concrete data, we could share in the other channel. Another question is, I think Gergen mentioned, with invoice capture, is it possible to capture an invoice for multiple purchase orders? That's a very good question. Actually, for the moment, we are supporting the multiple purchase order in the current invoice capture already. The reasons behind is that the linkage between the invoice and the purchase order are on the line level. So if you can correctly enter the purchase order on the line level, once you transfer it, it's actually these invoices are associated to the multiple purchase order. But for the moment, the experience to select the purchase order or the mapping between the purchase order lines with the invoice lines is not good in the invoice capture. If you check my roadmap carefully, actually we have one task to improve this experience. So when the feature is ready, you will see that you can easily select multiple purchase order and do the correct mapping. So that will come also in our roadmap. Are there any solution for QR code scanning coming on the invoice images with the land localization? That's also a very nice question. So for QR code scanning, I know this is required for some countries invoice specifically, and for the moment we haven't have a plan for cover the QR codes. First, the reason is that we do have other higher priority in hands, but meanwhile, we also like to collect more feedback whether the other nation also have such similar cases using the QR code scanning. So if we can get some common requirement on that, we can definitely put it in our roadmap. Mark mentioned, will the app be extendable in future for more advanced customizations? That's exactly what we planned. So for the first the stage, what we are offering is that we would provide a very fundamental function working smoothly. And the next step, when the order function, basic function is there, we would consider about the let customer or partner to do extension. For instance, introduce own customer fields in the invoice capture side and let the customer model to automatically capture this information and persist in the invoice capture side. Meanwhile, in the F&O, we will provide some mapping between the invoice capture fields to F&O fields. So it will let the end scenario working for supporting the additional custom fields. Yeah. If you have some more like idea what kind of specific function needed to be extended. Yeah. Okay. Go also mentioned another question regarding about the AI Builder license. So the question is, if a customer has the AI Builder license, can be them transferred to invoice capture add-ons? So actually, in our solution, we have our own license. So if you want to use the AI Builder license, you actually need to build your own flow and calling the AI Builder model. And this will lose the capability such as the derivation and validation logic, and also you will lose the side-by-side viewers which we introduced in the invoice capture. If you build on your solution, it will consume the AI Builder credits. If you are using our invoice capture, we have our own license. There is another question asking, does this allow invoice processing before receipt has been posted, or can the invoice be integrated as the invoice register journal for cases when receipts haven't happened yet? Okay, if I understand it correctly, this is a common ask for the European invoicing processing. What you need is that you need to have the invoice to be register at first, then create the pending vendor invoice and wait for the product receipts. And actually, this process is the F&O version, and we currently haven't make the integration with the invoice capture because we need more feedback whether this invoice register process is working perfectly in the F&O side or not. As this feature was just released in 10.037, the last release, I think the release is not yet GA. So once it's GA, you can have a try with this feature. If you do have any comments, let us know. And once it's stable, we will do the integration with the invoice capture to make this process as end-to-end. There is a question from Hammond. Is the free trial somehow limited time and functionality? Okay, free trial, as I mentioned, this stands for that for Dynamics 365 Finance customer, you do have one invoice to be tried within your environment. So once you actually have this 100 per month free trial, so for testing, I think it will be sufficient to do that. Yeah. Once it's exceed, then you need to do additional subscription, which costs $300 per 1,000 invoices. Yeah, per tenant per month. So I think due to the time, I will close. I will hand over to Kevin for the ending words.
Thank you, Rain. We'll look through the questions and consolidate any of the trends or items that make sense. We'll publish to the FAQ page as well related to the invoice capture. So we'll continue to go through the questions that were submitted and aggregate some answers there. Again, want to say thank you for attending today's Tech Talk. Have a great day.